If you wanted to get rid of your Fuji XH2s because of its autofocus system, now you might change your mind. Hello everyone, I hope you are all good. I'm Photorabs, a portrait photographer based in France, and I like to create content about camera gears and so on. I really love Fujifilm ecosystem. I have lots of Fujifilm cameras that I use on a daily basis, but recently I was thinking seriously to change completely my Fuji ecosystem, and I was not happy at all with the autofocus on these cameras, whether the Fuji XS20 that I'm using here or the Fuji XH2s that I have here on the side in this video, especially that, well, the Fuji XH2s is a beast of a camera, but the latest firmwares were horrible on this camera. But last month I went to Paris Photo Fair and I met Fujifilm team, and we discussed a lot about the Fuji autofocus issues and some other issues as well, and they told me you have to wait a little bit because in November we will get huge firmware update for the Fuji XH2s, and later on this firmware will be rolled onto the Fuji XS20 and some other cameras. So I was really hesitating to buy a Sony to use it as my main camera for my YouTube studio during that photo fair because they had great deals. But then I said, why not waiting a little bit, giving Fuji another chance and a last chance. And today we got the firmware 7.1 for this Fuji XH2s that's filming me in this frame here, and I have here the Fuji XS20 that does not have the latest firmware. I hope that the new firmware will arrive soon on this one so I can test it as well. So today the weather is horrible outside, it's raining, it will snow in a bit, so we have bad weather. I'm a little bit sick so I cannot go out, so I decided to compare the autofocus system of this Fuji XH2s here in my home studio. I tried the VILTROX 13mm 1.4 that I'm using now on this camera here on this angle, and I tried also the VILTROX 27mm 1.2, and now I'm recording this video with the Sigma 16mm 1.4, so you have an idea about these lenses, how they work, how they perform on this camera. To be totally transparent, I will show you now on the screen the footage I got before the firmware update and the footage I got after the firmware update, and then we will talk about it. So as you saw on the screen, I made this test in my home studio. I used the 13mm 1.4 from VILTROX at 1.4 and the 27mm 1.2 at 1.2, so the widest aperture on these lenses. And the test that I've done was in continuous autofocus. Of course, I was shooting in multi for the autofocus system, and the tracking sensitivity was 0 and the autofocus speed was +3. These settings worked the best for me before this firmware update. So I was using this configuration to use this camera for my professional work. I thought that, well, I noticed that this is the best settings that I have for this camera for the autofocus to work like somehow correctly. And also before I noticed that we had lots of hunt when we had the eye autofocus. That's why I used to switch a lot to the face autofocus instead of the eye autofocus on the Fuji XH2s. Although you can see that the results before the firmware update were not so bad in these conditions, but the autofocus was not following in the best way possible. But after the firmware update, I was totally surprised. I lost hope with the Fuji firmware updates because starting the firmware, I think 5, we started to have these issues on the camera in terms of autofocus. But now this one, well, it's not mind-blowing, it's not the fastest out there, but it is very intelligent. I felt that, I can see that on the monitor, I saw that on the computer when I made these tests, and it worked. Now finally I can say that I have a camera that I like. I have a bunch of lenses for this camera that I use on my workflow as a professional photographer and filmmaker, and it worked. So now this camera is totally usable, and that's why I will just remove the announcement that I put on the internet on the marketplace to sell this camera, because once again now I felt in love with this camera. Once again, it's been few months that I haven't used it on a daily basis because of that autofocus issue, but now so far everything is working as I want them to work, especially for my YouTube videos, for some product videography and so on. This autofocus looks very interesting, looks very good to me. So now I have set the autofocus of the Fuji XH2s there on the right eye autofocus. And so far it looks good. I didn't see any hunt in my tests. Maybe when I try to showcase some products, now it will hunt maybe a little bit. I cannot see that on the screen on the monitor, but in my tests I made, I noticed that it might hunt when we change the subject from very close to the camera to far from the camera. So what do you think now about this firmware update? Do you think you can use this camera with lots of confidence, or you cannot rely on because of its autofocus? For me, it looks very good. I'm very happy that I can see now that the square, the box on the eye is tracking my eye pretty good. Yeah, for me it looks very nice. Let me know your thoughts down below. This is the latest firmware for the Fuji XH2s that I've talked about last month in the Paris Photo Fair. Finally it arrived. I've been waiting a lot to have it because I was like so close, like this close, to sell this camera and get myself a Sony instead. And by the way, I will get a Sony but for some other purposes. Now I'm happy with this one. I'll keep it. I will not sell it. And I hope that this firmware will come very soon to this XS20 here, because we still have lots of hunts on the autofocus, even though I'm using the face auto detect and not the eye auto detect, but we still have lots of hunt here. Yeah, you notice that? Yeah, well, the hunt on this camera is huge. We had that on the Fuji XH2s previously, but now it's way better than before. So that was it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it, and by the way, I'm liking a lot this angle here. Let me know your thoughts about it, which one you prefer, this one or this one for a main camera for my YouTube setup. let me know that down below. Thank you for watching, and by the way, don't forget that you can go check all my videos for Black Friday. I'm trying to post one video per day to show you products that I use on a daily basis that I love, and that they are on sale now actually on the websites of the manufacturers. And of course I have affiliate links to everything. If you use my affiliate links, normally you get some extra discount. So that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for watching. Ciao for now.